Let's hopefully complete the chapter today. Four verses are pending. So before we start, maybe can I ask? Okay, let's do the invocation prayers first. Sorry. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So, would anybody want to summarize what we discussed in the last session, verses 39 to, sorry, 35 to 39?
Yes, Prabhuji. So, in the initial verse 335, Krishna explains that it is better to perform one's own duty, even imperfectly, than to perfectly
Mm,
perform someone else's duty and not to get distracted from our duties. Whatever situation we are in is arranged by Krishna. Devotee should always try to align with Krishna's plan and not to go against it. So this we come to know that if despite our efforts nothing works, then we should align with the plan. And then
yes.
in the further verses, ignorance covers our knowledge as soul is covered in the material body.
Mm,
And then the topic shifts to lust. Krishna answers that enemy is basically lust, which later transforms into anger and which arises from the modes of passion, Rajaguna.
mm,
And then out of envy, and then he explains that how lust manifests itself.
mm,
The
mm,
analogies given are uh, no, the analogies, Krishna gives three analogies showing how consciousness becomes covered by desire: fire covered by smoke, mirror covered by dust, and embryo covered in the womb.
yes.
And then in 339, eternal enemy is the lust. More you enjoy in your youth, more difficult it becomes in the old age to practice bhakti in general. That point we discussed.
Yes.
And yes, that's it.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. So essentially, what, as Prabhu mentioned, we started with duties, right? What one should do one's duties, irrespective of so many, whatever faults they are, because by nature, in the material world, every work is covered with fault. As we discussed, the four types of imperfections, or four types of imperfections we have, every living entity has in the material world. So naturally, any work done with these imperfections is also imperfect. So rather than trying to copy or imitate others' duties, one should do one's duty, even though imperfectly, because by performing one's duty that is prescribed, one gets purified. And then Arjuna asked the famous question that why is somebody, even if somebody is wanting to follow instructions, but sometimes helplessly is controlled or impelled by force to act otherwise. So then Krishna started analyzing that, this says that lust is a reason why one is forced to act like that, because it's already deep rooted in the heart of the conditioned soul, and it manifests in different activities to just express that lust in different ways, ultimately which takes us away from Krishna. And then the different degrees of lust is explained by Krishna. And then we see that the soul is covered by all these material coverings, and ignorance is the reason for the covering of the soul, and the lust also. And then now Krishna will start to speak from the 40th verse onwards. Now you know that lust is the enemy. So how to identify the lust? How to identify this enemy? Just like in a battlefield, we strategically position ourselves in such a way that the enemy, we can see the enemy clearly. The enemy should not be able to see us, right? So we always try to get sight of the enemy. Similarly, we know that lust is our enemy. So how do we identify where this lust is sitting? So now Krishna will start to explain this in the last few verses of this chapter. Okay, so let's. Dhanavir Prabhu, you want to chant this verse? Are you there, Prabhu? Yeah, please. Yeah, Prabhu, I'm not able to hear you clearly. The voice is breaking. Not at all clear. I don't know if it's only me, others are able to hear him.
No,
No,
Prabhu.
No, Prabhu.
Okay. No, Prabhu. Maybe, Prabhu, just you I mean, just check your audio settings and maybe you want to log out and log in again. Can discuss, maybe you can chant the next verse. We'll move on. Yeah. No, Prabhu, cannot hear you. Very, very soft. It's okay, Prabhu. You can chant the next verse maybe, yeah, by the time you sort out. Pandav Bandhu, Prabhu, you're there?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, please.
I can say. Indriyani monobuddhir asya etair vimohayati esa jnanam avritya dihinam, sorry.
Dehinam, yeah. It's Indriyani manobuddhir asyadhishthanam uchyate eter vimohyati esha jnanam avratya dehinam. Yeah.
Synonyms. Indriyani, the senses. Manaha, the mind. Buddhir, the intelligent. Ashya, of the lust. Adhisthanam, sitting place. Chade is called Etahir. Why all this? Vimohayati, bewilders. Ishaha, this lust. Jnanam, knowledge. Avrutya, covering. Dehinam, of the embodied. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting place of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport. The enemies has captured different strategic position in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places, so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about a sense object, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lust propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.84.13. Yashyadma buddhir punape hridakute swadhir kaladatitu bhauma ijyadit yatrita buddhir saline karhachit janes abhijnesu sa eva go katara. Human beings who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who consider the byproduct of the body to be his kinsman, who consider the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take bath rather than meet men of transcendent knowledge, there is to be considered like an ass or a cow.
Yeah.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, Prabhu. Thank you. So now Krishna is continuing to speak. So after explaining that the lust is the biggest enemy of the soul, because the lust drags the soul into material activities, and then the soul keeps on transmigrating from birth to birth in different bodies. So now Krishna is telling Arjuna that how to identify this lust. Now we know that lust is attacked us already. So where do we identify? Where do we find the lust? So now Krishna says the senses, the three things, senses, mind, intelligence, are the sitting place of this lust. Through them, the lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So it's very difficult for us to understand, or rather to conceive of how this lust has conquered all these different places in our bodily constitution. So later Krishna will explain which is higher than what, right? So we'll come to that towards the last part of this lecture, this chapter, right? So Prabhupada starts with saying the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. And Krishna is giving hints as to how to identify that. So now the senses are the ones that are interacting with the sense objects. For example, as we explained many times, right? You're going somewhere, you see something nice, immediately your eyes get attracted to that object. So that object, so the sight is the sense object, the vision is a sense object, and our eye is a senses. So the senses getting attracted to the sense object. So that is the first thing. So the mind is supposed to control the senses. So mind is supposed to control the sense, saying that don't get distracted by this vision, this, or don't get distracted by hearing this, or don't get distracted by smelling or tasting. So there are 5 types of senses, right? 10 senses are there, but 5 senses are the one that are known as the knowledge acquiring senses or jnanendriyas, through which the living entity gathers knowledge, like the sense of sight, the sense of smell, touch, taste, and hearing. So these are the 5 senses through which the living entity gathers knowledge. For example, if we say that, okay, milk, now you know that milk can be perceived by its color, white color, that is sight. Milk can be perceived by touching. You can feel that liquid touch of milk. Milk can also be smelt, especially when you boil the milk, or a fresh milk. I don't know whether nowadays we don't get to see, but in earlier days, in our younger days, we know that most houses in the villages had cows, right, at home. So we have all experienced so many times the fresh milk that is taken from the cow. It smells so nice. It is a little warm also. So it's so nice to even smell that fresh milk. So we can smell the milk, and of course we can taste it. And so all of these senses we can perceive milk, and through which we can understand or gain knowledge about milk. So that is the meaning of this jnanendriya. So these 5 senses we can gather knowledge. So mind is supposed to control these 5 senses, other senses also, but mainly the knowledge acquiring senses. No, if the mind is not properly directing the senses, that instead of hearing material sounds, you hear spiritual sound, or is seeing material forms, you see Krishna's form. So that is the duty of the mind, because the mind is guided by intelligence. So the sense objects and the senses is the first level. Then the mind controls the senses, and then the intelligence should control the mind, because intelligence is right next to the soul, as Prabhupada also explains here, right? So if the mind is not able to control the senses, it is because the intelligence is already polluted, right? The intelligence is polluted, and the mind, because intelligence is polluted, is not able to direct the mind. The mind gets drawn by the senses, and the mind draws the intelligence also along with it. So the example of the chariot, remember that chariot example we discussed, analogy. So the horses are running in all kinds of directions, and the charioteer or the intelligence is not able to control, and the reins are going out of control also. So this way, the chariot will go hither and thither and will lose direction and will not reach the destination, right? So first we have to understand where are the sitting places of lust. So this enemy has occupied, Prabhupada writes nicely, strategic positions in the body. So we have to identify how to get rid of this lust from these particular positions, right? So that's what Krishna is coming to now. And he explains how the senses get polluted, the mind gets polluted, and then the intelligence department, Prabhupada writes, department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Because what is the function of intelligence? Intelligence function is to discriminate between what is good and what is bad. Now, if the lust is taken over intelligence, naturally it will not be able to discriminate properly. It will not be able to exercise the power of discrimination. So it will think that sense gratification is the right thing to do. And that is, idea is then given to the mind. Then mind will choose, okay, this is the sense gratificatory, so it will go run behind that. The senses will drag the mind to that. So this is what is happening to us. So lusty intelligence influences spirit soul to acquire false ego. So we have discussed that the whole creation in the material world happens, from the pradhana to mahatattva, and then false ego manifests. and then false ego combines with different combinations of the modes, and then intelligence comes out, mind comes out, then the senses, then the gross body come out, right? So this is how the whole creation manifests. So that's why Prabhupada writes here, the lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire false ego. So the false ego is imposed upon the living entity by this lusty intelligence, right? Otherwise, if the soul is in real ego, he will never get entangled in the material world. He will know that his real home is the spiritual world. His real service is to serve the Supreme Lord and not to serve my material senses. And we don't mistake it as true happiness. And that's the reason of illusion, as Prabhupada writes here, bewilders. Because the soul is bewildered by this lusty intelligence, he mistakes sense gratification to be the true happiness. And Prabhupada quotes this beautiful verse in Bhagavatam, Yasyatma Buddhi Gunapetra Dhatuke. So Tridhatu means this whatever the body is made of three dhatus, right? The earth, fire, and water. So that is Tridhatu. And then we think that this body is all in all. You know, that's how the nationalistic movements and all these people think that, of course, that is good. Nationalistic spirit is good, but then that's not the only thing. That's not the only identification we have. Prabhupada says because of this materialistic ideas, we have created so many isms like nationalism, socialism, and in the name of being morally good or serving the country or serving the society, which is not bad, but that's still a material platform. We have to transcend this material because by staying on the material platform, even if you do any amount of good, you're not going to get liberated from the body. The soul is not going to get liberation from the body. Soul is still continue to get entangled in the body. There's no escape, even if you do any amount of material good in this world, right? You still get entangled in the birth and death. So those who have this buddhi, yasyatma buddhi, which means thinking that I am this body, atma buddhi means thinking that I am this body, and you connect everything to this surrounding your body and everything in relation to the body. Then Prabhupada says, or the verse says, Janeshu abhijneshu sa eva gokara. Gokara means cows and asses. So which means we are no better than animals. Because animals are completely in the material consciousness, right? They don't have any, they can't think of anything beyond the body. So if a human being is behaving like this also, is no good, no better than an ass or a cow. Now, cow here means not, of course, we worship cow, but here the cow refers to more an animalistic tendency, right? Ass or a cow. That means you are behaving like an animal, not like a human being. The other important thing this verse says that land of birth worshipable that we've discussed, and he goes to the place of pilgrimage just to take a bath. Many times in our it's a ritualistic thing in our tradition, in Indian tradition mostly, that we go to all these holy places just to take a dip. So during Kumbh Mela, we go to the Sangam in Prayagraj or wherever the Kumbh Mela is celebrated. So last year was a major, or what is it? Yeah, last year was a major celebration. So everybody went to take, it's good. I mean, nothing wrong in that. But then the purpose of going to the pilgrimage, as we have seen many times, and Bhagavatam explains, is to take association of sadhus and to hear Krishna Katha from them. That is the purpose. In the Bhagavatam, in the first canto, when you have the episode of Vidura, the 13th chapter, when Vidura comes back after his pilgrimage, comes back to Hastinapur, and in Hastinapur, the Pandavas, Yudhishthira Maharaj is ruling after the battle. He has won the battle, they have won the battle, and then Yudhishthira Maharaj is a king. And then Dhritarashtra and Gandhari are staying with them because all the sons of Dhritarashtra have already killed. Everything is the whole family is wiped out. Only he and his wife are remaining now. So they are old also. So they are dependent on Yudhishthira Maharaj. The same people whom he tried to hurt throughout his life. He schemed so many things just to hurt them or to keep them away from the kingdom. Finally, he ended up living with them and depending on them. But he was still not feeling anything. He thought everything is fine, right? He had a false impression, or he had a bewilderment that he was still the king, although he had lost everything. So that is the material consciousness. And Vidura came back from his pilgrimage only to take him out of this consciousness and liberate him from this materialistic consciousness. So when he comes back, Yudhishthira Maharaj, they're all very happy and address him. And there's a nice verse in Bhagavatam, the chapter where Yudhishthira Maharaj says, you are like Tirtha. Tirtha means place of pilgrimage, the same Tirtha word used here. He tells Vidura that you are Tirtha personified. So actually, the Tirtha becomes Tirtha, one is because of Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's physical presence when he was in the material worlds, because of which that land is holy. But the land is also holy because of pure devotees going there, pure devotees visiting and purifying the place. Because pure devotees, what they do, they only carry Krishna in their heart. And wherever they go, they distribute the message of Krishna, they chant the glories of Krishna. And by chanting by this glorification of Krishna, the whole place becomes even more purified. So one is Krishna's physical presence was there when he was in the material world. But more importantly, after Krishna is left, his glorifications are continuing through the mouths of pure devotees. And that's what really makes a place of pilgrimage holy. And it is the presence of pure devotees that makes. So Yudhishthira Maharaj is telling Vidura that you are a holy place personified because you are always carrying Krishna in your heart. So that is a sign of a tirtha. And hence, we as practicing devotees, when we go to tirtha or holy places, we should always take association of such sadhus who only speak about Krishna, only hear Krishna. So the whole life is surrounding, around Krishna. So if we take their association, then we'll get inspiration in our devotional service, and we'll also start developing some of the qualities of, always hearing Krishna Katha, not seeing and not hearing anything else, or seeing Krishna's beautiful forms in the temples. And like Ambrish Maharaja's life, we say that Savay Mana Krishna Padaravindayor, everything, all of his senses were engaged in Krishna service. Slowly we start developing those qualities in our own capacity, and we try to improve our devotion service. So that is what Prabhupada very beautifully explains in this purport, that this is a way to attack the lust. Yeah. Any questions on this verse? Okay, then let's move on to the next one.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Here is Prabhupada is mentioning a human being who identifies this body made of three elements, which is mind, senses, and intelligence. Isn't it here? Three elements.
No, here the three elements refers to the body itself, right? The body is made of three elements. See, the body is not made of intelligence, mind, and senses. The body is made of three dhatus, which means earth. See, our body is predominantly in the earth planet. The main ingredient is earth. Then there is water and fire.
Okay.
And these are the three ingredients. That's what here this verse talks about.
Okay,
But
Prabhuji.
the other three that you mentioned is a covering of the soul.
Mm.
The senses, the mind, and intelligence. Those cover the soul.
Cover the
The
soul.
lust has actually occupied these three places, that's why the soul is dragged into the material activities.
Hare Krishna,
Okay.
Prabhuji.
Yeah. Yes, Mataji.
Prabhuji, is like mind is a subtle thing,
Hmm.
but we always been relating mind with it identifies with the like material energy. So I have a confusion then how even being subtle, how is it carried forward to the next birth?
Okay. So the way it works, Mataji, is because it is subtle. That's why it is able to carry the soul. If it is gross, because in the material world, gross body we reject at the time of death, right? The gross body is burnt or whatever it is buried. But because the soul is covered by this gross body first, which is given away, there is also subtle covering of the soul. See, unless the subtle covering is there, the soul will not get entangled in the material world. If the soul is able to give up the subtle covering, also it will get liberated, which means it is completely free of all material, attachments and everything. Then the soul will come back to its pure state. Then the pure state means you go back to Krishna.
True.
But because the soul is still entangled, he's still in the false ego, still bewildered. And that bewilderment is because the subtle covering is still there. He's not able to give up the subtle covering. And hence, the subtle covering is the one that has all the impressions of the previous activities, past lives. And that is what takes the soul to the next life. And then he continues the entanglement in the next body. So once we are able to give up the subtle covering through the process of bhakti, so the bhakti is the only one which can actually dissolve, Bhagavatam says, it can dissolve the gross body and the subtle body also, so that the soul attains its true nature, which means without any coverings, without any material coverings. And that's the time when the soul goes back to Krishna.
So I can say that, when we during a fall down, we were already this subtle coverings, we already had false ego, and that's the reason we fell down. So when
No. See, when we fell down, see, as we discussed, right? The falling down, we don't know when we fell down or from where we fell down, but generally, yes, the understanding is that the soul is pure, but because the soul always has this, discussed last time, right? The marginal energy.
yeah.
The soul is considered a marginal energy, which means it's between the internal energy and the external energy. So the soul always has a tendency to associate with the internal energy or the material energy. So this independence is there. So if the soul misuses the independence and instead of associating with internal energy, it decides to associate with the external energy, that's when the coverings come on the soul.
Okay.
Because if the coverings are not there, the soul always knows that I
Yes.
belong to the internal energy. So there cannot be any false ego, no illusion. But unless the material covering is there imposed on the soul cannot get illusioned.
Right.
And the soul we discussed is tiny, right, compared to Krishna, who's super soul. So soul always has a tendency to be covered. Always has a tendency, even if the spiritual world still that possibility is there. But as we have seen, once experienced, once bitten, twice shy, they say that. So once experienced badly, chances are that he will not want to experience that again.
Correct.
Is that okay, Patrick?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Nice question. Okay. If nothing else, we can move to the next verse. Dhanvir Prabhu, are you there now?
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's much better, Prabhu. Yeah.
Tasmat tvam indriyanyado yamya bharata sabha papman sanjati yenam jana vijnana tamam. Tasmat, therefore, from you, indriyani senses, although in the beginning, yamya, by regulating Bharat, Rishabha, O chief amongst the descendants of Bharat, Manam, the great symbol of sin, Rajahi, Kap, he certainly Enam, is jnana of knowledge, jnana and scientific knowledge of the pure soul, Nashanam, the destroyer. Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of Bharats, in the very beginning, Kap, this great symbol of sin, last, by regulating the senses and slaying this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Wherefore, the Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy last, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.31. Jnanam parama kujyame yat vijnana samanvitam sa rahasyam tat angam cha grihana jahitam maya. The knowledge of the self and the Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious. But such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord Himself. Bhagavad Gita gives us the general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are part and parcel of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So, from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Last is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So, from any stage of life or from the time of understanding urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the last into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. So now Krishna is telling Arjuna that how to overcome this lust. So all that Krishna has spoken in the last so many verses in this chapter, now we can connect it, that why Krishna is telling that you have to perform your activities. You cannot just sit quiet and artificially restrain your senses. You can't artificially restrain your senses because by nature, the senses need an outlet to act, because that's the nature of the soul. Because soul is ultimately the supermost thing, right, in the whole constitution. So the soul has to be active. So if you don't give it positive engagement, it will be engaged in negative activities. That's why Krishna is using the word regulation here, not control. Very important. In niyamya means to regulate. That's the translation that Prabhupada has given. So in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin that is lust by regulating the senses. He does not say controlling the senses, because we know that control artificially cannot be done, because eventually it will come out, right? As we have discussed many times, like a high pressure will just burst. So rather than trying to control senses in our immature state, because right now we are still in the material platform, we have not attained that kind of maturity or spiritual understanding which great devotees have, that they don't have to act, because mind is always fixed on Krishna. So externally also they don't have to perform any activities, because they're constantly remembering Krishna, constantly thinking of Krishna. So whatever they do is already Krishna conscious activity. But we are not in that platform. So whatever activities we are currently doing, we have to continue doing them, but regulate them. Instead of unrestricted enjoyment, we try to regulate the senses. Again, go back to verse 264 of Bhagavad Gita, right? Raga dvesha vimuktestu vishayan indriyescharan atmavashir vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. So the way to get the mercy of the Lord is to have regulated activities. Whatever activities we're doing, regulated. So always try to strike the balance. Neither attachment nor aversion. Always try to tread the middle path, balanced life. So that is what is the meaning of regulated life. Because unless the senses are regulated, then we know that uncontrolled senses will lead to fall down, right? So it will go hither and thither. So the example of the chariot again. So that's why in our whole practice of Krishna consciousness, there are do's and don'ts. Do's and don'ts means you don't follow certain activities. For example, regulation means we follow the 4 regulative principles. That's why they call regulative principles. That we no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit connections, and what is the 4th one? No intoxication, no meat eating.
No gambling.
No
No
gambling.
gambling. Yes, no gambling. So four pillars of sin, right? So we are immediately told that you regulate, but it is not saying that just stop these activities. There are some negative activities you have to stop, but you have to undertake some positive activities. So Prabhupada explains that, gives an example that, let's say somebody is told that you don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this, and then you don't give anything to eat, right? You try to suppress the hunger of somebody. It's not possible. Eventually, that person will end up eating that. And he gave a very, very gross example, which actually happened in history. So he was giving an example in the Nazi concentration camps. If you read history during the World War, so the Germany was running these Nazi concentration camps, and they were kept literally like animals. Right? We know, if you refer to history. So in these concentration camps, they did not give proper food, nothing. So it so happened, it is so gross and unimaginable for us to even think that they were eating their own stool. It came to that situation that they were eating their own stool. So if you artificially control like this, restrain people, eventually they will end up doing something, because ultimately the body needs some kind of nourishment, right? So here Prabhupada is saying that instead of saying don't, there has to be some positive engagement. So that's why in our system we have, okay, you can't eat this without offering to Krishna, let's say. So you eat the same thing, but you offer to Krishna. So there is a positive engagement, because that offering, we know that will spiritually uplift us. And that is a way of regulation. So regulation doesn't mean that you repress or control artificially. Regulation means you direct it according to higher principles. So whatever principles, of course, supreme principle is coming from Krishna. Everything is coming from Krishna. So whatever Krishna's instructions are there, whatever the acharyas have told us, we try to follow them. So that is the way of regulation. So there has to be a positive engagement, that higher taste, which we have also read about in the second chapter. Param Drishtva Nivartate, 259 of Bhagavad Gita. So always when you read this, always refer back to connecting verses so that you can develop better understanding of this particular verse or any verse that you're studying. Because ultimately it's all connected. And second chapter is very important because it's a summary of the whole Gita. So always any chapter you can refer back or connect back to the second chapter. And that's how you get the flow. So here regulation is what very importantly Krishna is talking about. And by regulating, what will happen? You slay this destroyer, not just control the destroyer, but slay. That means you kill sin completely. And why it is important? Because the more the lust stays, it destroys our knowledge and self-realization. So two words are used here by Krishna, jnana and vijnana. And Prabhupada explains nicely, jnana means just theoretical knowledge or just knowing that we are not this body, but we are the soul. That is good. That understanding is good. And that is the platform in which the impersonalists or Mayavadis generally are on, that platform, right? They have only theoretical understanding because there's no practical engagement, right, for them. They just theoretically, they meditate that they are not this body, they're not this body, they're not this body. And they try to negate everything that is material because their understanding is, everything is Maya, only Brahman is the reality. Yes, that is true. That is the first step. But here Krishna is talking about Vijnana. Vijnana means scientific knowledge of the pure soul. So not just simple knowledge or theoretical knowledge, but what to do with that knowledge, how to act on that knowledge. That is important. That is meaning of Vijnana. So Vijnana means scientific knowledge means Prabhupada explains that knowing that I am a soul and Krishna or the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a super soul and there is an eternal relationship between me and the Supreme Lord. And how to renew the relationship or re-establish is through the process of devotion service. That is the meaning of Vijnana. And this lust you see here, it destroys all of this. So forget about devotion service. It even destroys the knowledge of the fact that we don't understand that we are not this body. And that's where the illusion, the false ego, everything is there. So as in the previous purport Prabhupada mentioned, right, the lusty intelligence actually covers the constitutional position of the soul. The soul does not understand that he's actually part and parcel, he's actually not his body and he's part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So this knowledge is completely destroyed. Hence, to destroy the enemy called sin, we have to start with regulating our senses. So that is the instruction that Krishna is giving here. And Prabhupada refers to this very important verse in Bhagavatam. So this verse comes right before the Chaturshloki Bhagavatam. So just like you have Chaturshloki Bhagavad Gita in the 10th chapter, you have Chaturshloki Bhagavatam also in the second canto, 9th chapter, starting from 33, 34, and 35, 36. So just before speaking the Chaturshloki Bhagavatam, Krishna is telling Brahmaji that Jnanam Parama Guhyam Me, yet Vijnana. So same thing, Jnana and Vijnana. So knowledge of the self and Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious, but such knowledge and specific realization, that is Vijnana, can be understood if it explained with their various aspects with the Lord himself. So the practical understanding is coming from the Lord himself. So it is not just simple understanding that we are not his body, and a soul, but what to do with that knowledge, how to act on that knowledge. So that is also explained by the Lord himself in Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita also. Yeah. So Bhagavad Gita also Prabhupada writes, gives us general and specific knowledge of self. The living entities are parts and parcels, and therefore they're simply meant to serve the Lord. This we have seen. And this is what is known as Krishna consciousness. So from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this consciousness. So we may ask that, okay, we have not practiced from the very beginning of life, so what to do? So Prabhupada encourages us that it's not only that, even a late beginner can become a lover of God. The important thing is, see, why is it so? Because this Krishna consciousness or love of God is inherent in every living entity. It is not something new. The Prabhupada says it's not something that you go and purchase from the supermarket and, okay, I have to buy love of God. No. Love of God is inherently there in every living entity. It's just that we have forgotten it. And we have forgotten it is because of this material consciousness, because of being entangled in this material world for God knows how many ages and how many millions of births. We have completely forgotten our true relationship with Krishna. But it only takes the right association. It just takes the right association that reawakens our consciousness. And that's why Prabhupada writes, it's so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles. Again, remember, go back to the verse number 31 that we have seen in this chapter, that as long as one is not resentful or one is not objectionable to the instructions, in the beginning we may not execute, but at least we are favorable to that instruction. That is good, because that means you have faith. And later in Nectar of Devotion, you will see the process, right? Starts with faith first, Ado Shraddha. Then everything follows. Bhajana Kriya, Sadhu Sangha. Then our faith becomes solid, more solid. From simple faith, it becomes very strong, Nishtha. And then we develop taste, love of God. So that is the process. So initially we have faith. Faith means I'm not objectionable to the instructions, but I may not be able to immediately execute it. But that is fine. The first is faith. If you have faith, slowly everything will follow. Then you start following the regulative principles. That's what is happening to all of us. We initially we were not sure whether we should take it up or not. But then we were told by devotees that there's no harm in trying. Just try. You're not losing and you're not paying and losing that money, right? It's just, you just try. Maybe start chanting one round, start coming for programs, start hearing, taking darshan. That's enough, right? We'll start chanting slowly. You see the benefit, the purification already happening. And naturally we feel, because of the purification, we feel more and more that I have to follow these principles. That clearing of material dirt is happening already, right? Because of which the anarthas go away slowly. The lust also starts getting reduced. It's not completely going away, but starts getting reduced. And when that enemy is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker, lust as an enemy becoming weaker and weaker, we become stronger and stronger in execution of devotion service. So that is a sign. So we can inspect for ourselves in our own life that how sincerely we are performing. The more sincere we are, which means we are more getting rid of the enemy called lust. So that is a very simple test for ourselves, that whether we are progressing in devotion service or not. And Prabhupada explains nicely that lust is only a perverted reflection. So we have discussed this in the last session, that originally it is love, but in contamination with material nature, it gets transformed into lust. Just like the milk becomes yogurt by the touch of tamarind or lemon, right? Something like that. So it is originally there in everyone's heart, but it is contaminated because of material association. So, and the more we are taking association, the more difficult it becomes to return to the normal condition. It's like a diseased body, right? The more the body is diseased, the more difficult it is to come back to normal. So right now we are all in a diseased condition, but it's just that we don't see that disease. It's a subtle conditioning of the mind and intelligence, which is actually taking us away, more and more away from the normal condition of life. But by following the regulative principles of devotional service, gradually we come out of these coverings, and then we are established in our true position. And ultimately we convert the lust into love of God, which is the ultimate perfection of life. So that's how Prabhupada explains this very nice purport. Any questions or comments?
Two things. Lust and attachments are not the same thing, right?
Sorry, Mataji?
Lust and attachment is not the same thing.
No, lust actually, we remember the 262, 263 verse of Bhagavad Gita, right? First contemplation happens, then attachment becomes lust. So eventually you start contemplating too much on anything material, that eventually it gets transformed into lust. Because then you develop a strong desire to acquire that thing or enjoy that thing, right?
The reason asking is because the next question was that is lust and love, attachment and love goes together. Similarly, attachment and lust also goes together.
Yeah, see, but the problem is, Mataji, here what we call love in this material world is actually all lust. There's nothing called love, right? So that's what Prabhupada explains very clearly in so many places. So if you hear the lectures of Prabhupada related to this chapter also, Prabhupada explains that actually we think it is love, but actually in the material world, there's nothing called love. Ultimately, the closest thing that comes to love, Prabhupada explains, is mother's love for the child. That is the only thing, not even father's love or brothers or sisters' love. No, mother's love. Prabhupada makes it very clear that his mother's love is the most selfless thing that you can find in the material world. And that gives you an impression of the actual love that exists in the spiritual world between the living entity and Krishna. because that is completely pure. See, the only difference in Chaitanya Charitamrita explains the love and lust. The difference is love means you want to satisfy Krishna. Lust means I want to satisfy myself. That's all. In the material world, ultimately everything is based on how I can satisfy myself. Even though externally it may appear to be selfless, but like for example, many people do charity, right? So it may seem like a very moral activity. Yes, it is moral. It's good activity, better than consuming everything for yourself. At least you're giving something back. But in that also there is an underlying motive that I want to get name and fame. Tell me one person who's, I mean, except those who give for Krishna, right? The material charity. Tell me one person who is selfless, truly selfless, that he doesn't want any glory or anything. It may be very, very rare, but that too, that person in the heart may be really very spiritual. Otherwise, it's not possible in the material world. Because remember what that exchange between Prabhupada and that Arya Samaj person, he was saying that what is wrong in just perform good activities? Why do you have to really struggle and do worship and all of these things? As long as you're good in the material world, that is good. But we know that in the material world, nothing called goodness exists in a pure form. Everything is contaminated by passion or ignorance. There's nothing called pure goodness in the material world. We have to transcend this material world to really experience pure goodness. Similarly, there is no pure love in the material world. It's actually all lust. So what you're saying, attachment, everything, even though we may say it is love, but actually it is all lust, because ultimately we are saying what is in it for me? How can I get benefit or how can I enjoy it? So mother's love, we can understand that is the highest, right? But even then, that is from a spiritual standpoint, it is not the purest form of love. But in the material world is the highest. Prabhupada says that from that we can understand how selfless love is in the spiritual world, where everything is devoted to Krishna. In the spiritual world, in the third canto, you will see the description of the spiritual world, right? It's unimaginable that we cannot even see the connection in the material world. So the spiritual world, all the living entities are serving Krishna. So for example, the birds are chirping and they're singing. Suddenly the bee starts humming. But all the birds, and the birds are much sweeter in one sense than the bee, right? The humming of the bee sometimes can be irritating. And the birds like cuckoos and all that, they sing so beautifully. But all these birds, they immediately stop. They want to hear the bee humming and singing for Krishna. In the material world, you cannot imagine that. In the material world, everybody will they'll start singing more loudly just to quieten the other person. That's the nature of the material world, because ultimately we want to show our capabilities, our skills. We want to show that we are the best. That competition spirit is there, which comes from envy actually. Envy is the root of competitive spirit. That's why Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, the very first chapter, Shukadev Goswami or Vyasadeva says, Nirmatsaranam satam. Nirmatsara, which means unless you come out of envy, you cannot really be, cannot come out of the competition spirit, which is so common in the material world. So in the material world, everything is topsy-turvy, Mataji. Everything is opposite. So love becomes lust. So in the material world, we cannot really truly experience this love unless and until we start, directing all our desires to Krishna. Then only we start to experience that true love. Even then, material world, we cannot truly experience it. But then the more we engage in devotion service, the more we are trying to selflessly serve Krishna and his devotees, then we start to begin to experience that, okay, this is true love. Because how do we experience it? Because we feel very peaceful and happy at heart. A lustful person can never be satisfied, can never be happy. The more you try to satisfy your senses, we can guarantee based on scriptures and what Prabhupada has given that one can never be happy in the material world by just trying to satisfy your senses. We spoke about Hiranyakashipu and so many other demons. They had everything, but they were never happy. They were never satisfied. Is it okay, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhu, thank you so much. At least clarity is there.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Okay. Let's look at the last two verses. Rameti Mataji, you want to chant?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
इन्द्रियाणि पराण्याहुः इन्द्रियेभ्यः परं मनः मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर्यो बुद्धि परतस्तु सा. Synonyms: Indriyani, senses; Parani, superior; Ahu, are said; Indriyebhya, more than the senses; Param, superior; Mana, the mind; Manasah, more than the mind; Tu, also; Para, superior; Buddhi, intelligence; Yah, who; Buddhi, more than the intelligence; Parata, superior; Tu, but; Sa, he. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation: The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Purport: The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If, therefore, the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses and mind is superior to the sense objects. If, therefore, the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Param drishtva nivartate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger, and even though the senses are very strong like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Madhu. So this verse is very important again. So here Krishna explains the constitution, right? How the living entity gets covered by these material coverings, right? So we have discussed briefly in the last few verses that the working senses are superior to dull matter. So as Prabhupada explains that here in the purport, the lust is reserved within the body, but the lust has got to have some outlet to express, right? And that outlet is the senses. Hence, the senses are considered superior to the gross body, which means the gross body is just inert matter, but actually the expression of this the body or the soul expresses itself to the body through the medium of senses. So the way the soul interacts with the material world is through the senses. That is the first point of contact, right? That's why the senses are considered higher than dull matter or dull body. Then we know that the mind is a control of the senses. The senses are all controlled by the mind, the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. So the 10 senses are controlled by the mind. That's why Ravana, in Ramayana, there is a nice analogy given of Ravan and the others also. So Ravan has 10 heads, right? So it's considered, Ravan is considered the personification of mind because he has his 10 heads, the form of 10 senses. And then Sita Mata was captured by Ravan and kept in the forest in Ashokavan. So the Sita Mata here represents the living entity who is captured by the mind. The mind captures the living entity because it entraps the living entity in material consciousness. Then Lord Ram is, of course, the Supreme Personality of Godhead here. So he's Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the soul is separated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he is under the control of the mind and intelligence or whatever. Then Hanumanji comes. Hanumanji is the messenger of the Lord. So here the Hanumanji represents the spiritual master. The spiritual master carries the message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and gives the message to the living entity that your actual home belongs in the spiritual world. You are actually trapped here. So he tries to rescue the living entity from that consciousness and then go back to the original consciousness or original home, where he's supposed to belong to along with the Supreme Lord. So this analogy is very nice for us to understand graphically. We can see how Ravana was completely out of control because his 10 senses were dragging the mind and he was going everywhere, right? Despite having all the opulence in the three material world, the three worlds, he was conquered the three worlds, but yet he was not satisfied. He had such a nice wife, Mandodari, but still he was running behind other women, right? Sita Mata was one. Then also there was a Vedavati. There's a woman called Vedavati. Once Ravan was flying in his Pushpak Viman, suddenly he saw this lady downstairs performing some austerity and immediately was attracted. Then he tried to grab her also, but then she also was very powerful. She actually gave up her body because she felt that she was, her purity was lost because this person touched her. So in everywhere, he tried to grab others' property. So the grabbing tendency, grabbing others' things, that's a lust, manifestation of lust. So the lust is reserved. So the mind has completely taken control by lust, in Ravan's case. And then wherever he saw an opportunity, the lust manifested through his senses. Right? Wherever he went, Ravan had, just like in our home, right? The children have so many trophies in the school. This competition they won, some academics or some sports or some extracurricular activities. And the parents feel very proud that this child has done so much, and they always keep it in the showcase, right? When you enter the house in the hall, they always keep it in the showcase. Like this, Ravan had a habit of collecting curses. So in the showcase, he had so many curses. So one is Vedavati. Then he once tried to even take away Parvati Mata from Lord Shiva. Can you imagine his extent of his intoxication? That the Lord Shiva, who gave him the benediction, that because of Lord Shiva and Brahma, he got the benediction. And he was a great Shiva Bhakta actually. He is a great Brahmana. He was a Brahmana himself, Brahmana. And he knew so many shlokas and so he used to glorify Lord Shiva also in his Shiva Stuti. So once he went to Kailash and he really wanted to capture Parvati Mata. And then of course, Lord Shiva and Parvati were sitting there, and then he said, I will carry this whole mountain and take with me. And he tried to move Kailash Parvat, and then, of course, Lord Shiva is all powerful. So he didn't allow that. He suppressed he crushed his hand with this mountain. Then he came to his senses. And what is he doing? Is actually his worship of the Lord. So because of the lust, he had completely no control over his senses. And wherever he went, he accumulated curses. So that's the nature of Ravana. And then we all are in one form or the other also Ravanas, because in the material world, our mind is completely uncontrolled. It is dragged by the senses. The senses need engagements by connecting with sense objects, and the mind runs behind the senses. Whereas the mind actually is superior to the senses, as explained here. The mind is higher than senses. So what is the duty of the mind? To regulate the senses. And how can it regulate? Only if the higher intelligence, which is higher than the mind, can control or guide the mind or give direction to the mind. So that's the process, right? The soul is first, then the intelligence, then the mind, then the senses, and then the cross body. So that is what is Krishna explaining here, that Indriyani Parani Ahur, that the senses are higher than the matter, Mana, Indriyabhya param mana. Param means superior. So mana is superior to Indriyabhya, senses. But manasastu para buddhi. Buddhi is further higher than mind. And the buddhi is very close to the soul because it's next door neighbor. Right? And of course, the soul is considered to be higher than the intelligence. So remember the chariot again. The charioteer is intelligence, and the passenger, which is sitting just behind the charioteer, actually he is the controller of the whole chariot, right? And he is the controller of the whole chariot, and he is supposed to guide, control the intelligence. Intelligence is supposed to control the reins, and the reins is supposed to direct the horses to go in a particular direction. So if this doesn't happen, the opposite thing happens. The horses drag the mind drags the horses drag the rope cannot be controlled, and then the intelligence is also controlled by the mind. So that's the opposite thing. So this is the actual constitution where the soul is higher than intelligence, then the mind, then the senses. And the only way we can come back to this original consciousness is through Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada explains. Because in Krishna consciousness, ultimately, Krishna is directing our senses, or intelligence rather, or Krishna is directing the soul. Because the soul and the super soul are in the same body. In the heart, the soul is there as well as the super soul is there. So in Krishna, if you are Krishna conscious, the soul is always looking towards Krishna or super soul and receiving directions from Krishna directly, either through as a super soul or through the manifestation of the super soul in the form of guru outside, right? External guru, external form. That is also a manifestation of super soul. Like guru is considered a external manifestation of the super soul. So either through super soul's guidance or through the guidance of an external spiritual master, the soul is connected to Krishna and receives directions. And then that's how the soul is able to direct the intelligence, mind, senses. So that is the proper sequence. But in the material world, everything is upside down. The senses control the mind, mind controls intelligence. Intelligence, of course, drags the soul also in material activities. So Prabhupada gives different examples here. And we can see how the mind is superior in our own life. We can experience, right? Prabhupada gives the example of dreaming. So we all know that in the night when we sleep, all our senses are inactive. The body is not acting, but the mind is still active. That's why we see dreams. And what happens in a dream is the soul leaves the body, goes into another body. That's why we see different other bodies in the dream. And some of them may or may not be connected to the present body. Sometimes we see totally different things which we cannot even associate. I'm sure we have all experienced it, right? I'm still experiencing it. We see some bodies, which are totally different from where we are. We see totally different people. They're all impressions of our past life. And we find we assume temporary bodies. So the soul actually leaves, goes into another body. And then through that, it manifests different other bodies, which we see in the dream. And then before we wake up, the soul comes back. Of course, has to come back. Otherwise, we'll not wake up at all. The soul comes back to this body. And then that's how we wake up, and then we start our activities again. And we have some faint impressions of the dreams that we saw. Because the same soul comes back, and then those impressions are still there. So this is what happens in a dream. So the mind is still active. And of course, intelligence is active, and soul, of course, is always active, as we have seen. The soul, there is no, it's not dull matter, is always active. That's why the way to come out of this is to regulate senses and then engage the senses in proper spiritual activities. So the mind is engaged directly in service of Lord, then there is no chance that senses will become engaged in other ways. And this is what is explained in the Param Drishtva Nivartate verse, the second chapter. If there is a higher engagement, then lower engagements can be automatically given up. And then the last part of the paragraph also Prabhupada explains the same thing, that how one has to seek out the constitutional position of soul and then engage the mind always. And the same thing, right? So you first establish spiritual intelligence by connecting to Krishna. Our intelligence is purified, and that purifies the mind. The mind purifies the senses, and then the senses, even though are very strong still, because as long as in the material world, remember, we are not liberated. We are still in the material world. There is always possibility of, that's what Prabhupada writes in the last sentence. The senses are very strong, but then because of spiritual intelligence, the senses are like serpents with broken fangs, which means they will not really have any negative effect. We are so strong in a spiritual practice that's why we see so many devotees, even in our society, we see so many personalities, devotees. They are like, brahmacharis, and even though they are constantly mixing with the outside world and everything, but because the spiritual practice is so strong that the senses can never go astray. They're always very fixed. I know examples of Radhesham Prabhu, Gaurang Prabhu, all these great personalities in a society. They are such powerful preachers and they have such strong sadhana, very important. We always forget that externally we may see that they are great preachers, they are great orators, they speak so well from Shastra, from all, anything you ask, anything you speak, anything they speak is so relatable and they have so much of knowledge and understanding. But it is the root of that is in the sadhana. For example, Radhesham Prabhu, I've seen him personally when I visited Pune temple. That morning, every time Mangalarti is there, he finishes the 16 rounds before even immediately after Mangalarti, he finishes 16 rounds. He does not give any chance for anything else to get astray or anything like that. So very focused, very pakka in his sadhana, and that is why you see the outcome of that manifested in his preaching activities, and such strong spiritual practice. That's why the senses can never go astray. So even though senses are there and they are acting in interaction with the sense objects, but they never fall down, or there's no fall down, or there's no negative engagement of the senses, because the spiritual practice is so strong that the intelligence is properly directed by the soul. The intelligence directs the mind, and the mind controls the senses. So the reins in the horses are always firmly in the hand of the intelligence. So they can never go astray. The horses can never go astray. So that is the potency of Krishna consciousness, as Prabhupada mentions here, that only by Krishna consciousness, that unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna, there is every chance of falling down. The moment we become weak or slack in our sadhana, then we know for ourselves, right? For example, sometimes we are not able to chant our rounds properly, maybe due to some bodily difficulties, or it's just that, we have not had proper sleep, or the work was so hectic the previous day that we couldn't sleep, and next day we get up and we are sleepy and a bit crazy sometimes, because the body also needs some rest. So if not had enough rest, then naturally we're not able to concentrate properly on chanting. The chanting quality becomes very bad. Then through the day we feel so disturbed, so agitated, and that is the reason because soul has lost connection with the spiritual source. It's like in India, in Singapore we don't experience, but in India we find sometimes the bulb is there, it's connected to the power point also, but it sometimes flickers. You experienced, right, many times in India. India is very common. It flickers, even though the power is electricity, everything is there, but sometimes the voltage may be so low, or the bulb may be very old bulb. The filament is just going to burst anytime, so it's just flickering. Or there might be some problem with the connection, some wiring somewhere. In India, though, it's all exposed wiring mostly, right? So the rats might have gone and bitten the wires. So there is connection problem. The electricity is not flowing through smoothly. So because of which there is always some flickering bulbs every now and then you find. Especially in the street lights, you'll find plenty. The houses also sometimes you find. So that is because we have lost connection with the source. The spiritual source, Krishna, we have lost connection, and that's why we become weak in our spiritual activities. And that is manifests in the form of mind that is very agitated. And then agitated mind means no control over the senses. So this is the fall down that happens constantly, and we have to constantly watch out for this in our life. That's why Prabhupada emphasized so much on Mangalarti, chanting, reading, hearing. And that's why the temple program was so built, so designed by Prabhupada, that there's no way that one who's sincere can never actually fall down. If somebody is not sincere, of course, there's every chance of falling down. But one who is sincerely practicing, the way Prabhupada has given the whole structure, morning program, then afternoon devotees go out for preaching, book distribution, evening come back, and again there is Aarti, there is some class, so morning Bhagavatam, evening Bhagavad Gita class. So Prabhupada designed it so nicely that there is no chance of any alternative engagement or fall down. So that's the vision of an acharya, and because he understands that the material world is extremely powerful, material energy. So there's every chance of falling down. Hence, we have to constantly be on the guard to protect ourselves. So that's this summary of this verse. Very nice verse spoken by Krishna. Any questions?
Prabhu, in the previous verse, we read the statement that the mind is the intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. So that point gets very much clear over here in this shloka.
Correct, yes.
That what is the relevance of being the next door neighbor?
Yes.
So
correct.
Prabhu, please correct me if I've just made it the algorithm right. So soul is when the soul is immediate next door neighbor. So if the soul is connected to Krishna
Mm.
and intelligence is absorbed in Krishna consciousness,
Mm.
so then mind becomes stronger,
Yes.
senses are directed, even if
Yes.
straying,
Yes.
and then the dull body is used in a worthy way.
Absolutely. You're right.
Okay.
That's the correct
So
understanding.
okay, so but then again the thought came that there was one shloka, I
Mm.
don't know the number of it, that how much ever it can, the senses, if not engaged, it can, Ramati Mataji, yesterday shloka, what Rangmay Prabhu spoke, what was that? 2 point?
I think
60.
2.60.
Yatato hiya
60.
vikantaya purushasya vipaschita. That was.
Yes,
Yes,
Prabhu.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Prabhu. It
Yeah.
can stray you away.
Mm. Yeah, that's why Prabhupada
So,
writes here, no? Unless and until you have strong spiritual association, there is every chance of falling down, which means the senses can drag away the mind. Even if that verse says, Yadatopi Kaunte Purushasya Vipaschita. Vipaschita means one who is intelligent. So, but that intelligence is able to discriminate between what is good and what is bad. But still, the material energy, remember, that is very strong. You should never ever think that by my spiritual practice I can exercise control over material energy. No, material energy will always remain stronger. But we take shelter of the Supreme. Always remember that it is not me. The moment we start thinking that I am able to control my senses, I am able to exercise, I can decide how to act, how to manifest my senses. That is where the fall down starts actually. So even though one may be very intelligent, he may be practicing, but the moment this independent thinking comes that I am the controller, I am the one who is doing it, that actually separates us from Krishna. Unknowingly, we don't even realize that. For us to remain connected to Krishna means that I always know that I am the servant. I am dependent on Krishna. It's Krishna's mercy that is helping me to overcome my material consciousness or my material senses, engagement of the senses in material activities. Always remember, not because of me, but it's because of Krishna. So that verse is saying that Yadato api kaunteya purushasya vipaschita, even though one is intelligent, but still, because he's lacking this consciousness that ultimately everything is coming from Krishna, that independent consciousness means you have already cut your connection with Krishna. Then, of course, on our own, we have no capacity. Even though we may be practicing Krishna consciousness, we may understand everything theoretically. But because we have lost that connection, that mercy aspect is cut, then we are at the mercy of the material energy. Then the material energy takes over.
you had given one statement, Prabhu, voluntary endeavor is the only platform
Yes.
on which
Yeah.
you will get mercy.
Correct.
So, I think that's a revision part. Yes, thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else?
Prabhuji, just with context to that verse that we were discussing, 2.60, I was just
Yeah.
reading the translation once again. So it says that the senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. So
Correct.
that reminded me of what you told us, I think 2 verses back, that when we try to just control something, it may not give us the
Yes,
required
absolutely.
results. So it's regulation that we need to do by
Yes.
connecting with
Yes.
Krishna rather than artificially trying to control. So
Yes.
possibly in that verse, Krishna is trying to highlight that when you artificially try to control, even though you may have the sense of discrimination, the senses can still go astray.
Yes, absolutely. So that was very, very true, Mataji. That verse actually explains that even if person knows that this is not good, that is good, this is bad, but because he lacks sufficient, practice of Krishna consciousness or spiritual practice, it's just a theoretical standpoint, that a theoretical position that one may think that I'm, by understanding what is good, what is bad, I am able to control my senses. But the deeper point there is the moment that thinking of independence comes, right, that I can control my senses rather than a true devotee who thinks that I'm not able to do anything. Actually, I'm useless. I'm fully dependent on Krishna. But all I can do is just sincerely try to please Krishna or try to follow. But ultimately, he knows that everything is coming from Krishna and everything is dependent on Krishna. So that full dependence on Krishna is actually surrender. See, in material world, surrender means we give up everything, right? We raise our hands. But actual understanding of surrender means I am not independent, I'm fully dependent on Krishna. that Sharanagati, that principles that Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned, that Goptratve Varanam Tatha, that those symptoms of surrender is that I fully surrender, that fully understand that Krishna is a protector and he's the one who's guiding us. I on my own have no capacity. So what to speak of controlling my senses? So that full dependence on Krishna is the only thing that protects us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so let's go to the final verse. Nishchay, are you there?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes, please read.
Ivam buddhe param bhutva samstabhyam mana
No, it's like this. Evam buddhe param buddhva samsthabhyam atmanam atmana. So if you have some difficulty in this particular word, just go to the word to word. Samsthabhya atmanam atmana. Then you combine. Samsthabhya atmanam atmana.
Okay. Evam buddhe param bhutva samstabhya atmanam atmana jahi statrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Synonyms. Evam, thus, buddhe, to intelligence, param, superior, buddhvan, knowing, samstabhya, by studying, atmanam, the mind, atmana, by deliberate intelligence, jahi, conquer, shastram,
Shatrum.
Shatrum, okay, the enemy, Mahabaho, O mighty armed one, Kama Rupam, in the form of lust, Durasadam, formidable. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjuna, one should study the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. Purport. This third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidance the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature, desire for overloading and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and by the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of the material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus end the Bhakti Vedanta purports to the third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam in the matter of Karma Yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this is the last verse. Now Krishna is concluding here. That's why he says evam, which thus. So after having seen all the things that he has spoken about and whatever Arjuna has asked and Krishna responded, giving answers, with us knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence. That is the constitution of the soul, right? Soul is transcendental to senses, mind, and intelligence. Oh, mighty armed Arjuna, because it's like a battle we are fighting, right? All of us are fighting a battle. So we have to be mighty armed. So Arjuna is, of course, mighty armed, but in our own way, we also have to be mighty armed to conquer this enemy that has occupied all these strategic positions. So first of all, knowing ourselves to be transcendental, by hearing transcendental knowledge, we understand that our constitutional position is soul and we are not this body. Then we have to act on that platform. That is jnana, vijnana, nashanam, right? By This jnana and vijnana, we try to destroy the enemy or lust. And then one should study the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence. Deliberate spiritual intelligence, Prabhupada explains Krishna consciousness. Simple. Deliberate. So this word is very nice. Deliberate spiritual intelligence. Deliberate means we have to take real endeavor. As Mataji was mentioning, voluntary endeavor. That's the only qualification we have. We have to really endeavor ourselves to cultivate the spiritual intelligence. Intelligence right now, what we have is material intelligence. But we have to convert that into spiritual intelligence by deliberate attempts to train the intelligence by Krishna consciousness. And thus, having acquired a spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. That's the only way. There is no other possibility. We cannot pour any medicine for the mind and intelligence. There is no medicine, unfortunately, right? For the body, there may be, but there is no Ayurvedic medicine that you can go and do some massage on the mind and intelligence and give some spiritual strength. It's not possible. So remember one thing, Bhagavatam says that material problems are there, but you don't find material solutions to the material problems. If you find material solutions to material problems, the result will be that we'll have a bigger problem. Because by material solutions, we cannot solve this problem. It requires spiritual intelligence and spiritual strength or spiritual medicine. That's the only way. And that is, of course, Krishna consciousness. Whatever we are following as practicing devotees, that is the spiritual strength through which only we can conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. And then Prabhupada writes nicely in this purport that he kind of summarizes the whole chapter. That, this is conclusively. So ultimately, we know the conclusion to this chapter is that Krishna consciousness is the only way where through which we can regulate our senses, through which we can purify our activities and develop love for, or rather redevelop or reawaken the love for Krishna. That's the only way. That's the sum and substance. So if you look at this whole chapter, right, we started with what? The first 9 verses where Krishna introduced this yoga ladder, right? He explained that how somebody with a pure material consciousness, how he can slowly get purified by performing activities that are prescribed for his varna and ashrama. So initially we start with karma. Then slowly we come to sakama karma yoga, where we are still attached to our work and we are still attached to results, but we slowly start developing some detachment by utilizing some of the fruits for some higher cause. Then we come to the platform of nishkama karma, which means by this practice of activities and by purification of consciousness, we come to the platform of nishkama, where we are detached from the results, but yet we perform our activities. So there are many sections in the verses where Krishna explains that even though you are in the detachment platform, but because you are still in the material world, you still have to purify yourselves by performing activities as a matter of duty. So the caretaker mentality, the cashier in the bank, he does his work but is not attached to the money because he knows that it doesn't belong to him. It belongs to the bank. So we also do our activities such a way that everything we deal with is Krishna's energy. So it has to be utilized in Krishna's service. So that's why we slowly come to, from nishkama karma, we come to the platform of jnana. Jnana means we understand that source of Krishna is source of everything. So everything must be dovetailed in his service. And then we come to the platform of bhakti yoga. So all of these verses that Krishna explained, that initially you do karma kanda, sacrifices for demigods, which is like indirect worship to Krishna. Then gradually he purifies and comes to direct worship of Krishna. And then he develops detachment. Then he becomes self-realized. That is the knowledge part. And then he come to the platform of bhakti, where 30th verse, Krishna explained pure bhakti, pure devotional service, right? That Mai Sarvani Karmani Sanyasya Adhyatma Chetasa. That means you give up everything for the service of Krishna. That means you're still performing activities, but with the complete spirit of detachment, the spirit of renunciation that nothing belongs to me, everything belongs to Krishna, right? So you become a full caretaker. Then you just have that mentality that I'm detached, but I'm not neglecting my duties. I'm not ignoring my duties. Whatever ashrama and varna I am in, I'm still continuing to perform my duties to set, first of all, to purify myself, also not to create disturbance in society, right? By artificially changing your position, we cannot. So sthane sthita. So this theme is running across the whole chapter, right? We have to be situated in our ashrama and varna, and staying in that ashrama, we have to cultivate the spiritual consciousness by devotional service, right? And that's how Krishna then explains that, okay, the reason behind doing all of this, and by Arjuna's question that why is one forced to act sometimes unwillingly, then Krishna explains lust. So lust has taken control of our mind, intelligence, and senses. That's why even if externally or I want to do it, but sometimes I'm not able to do, that's because lust has overtaken this. So then we are trying to find out how to come out of the lust. So by again continuing to practice spiritual activities or devotion service and regulating the senses, more importantly, in a regulated fashion, that is, there are do's and don'ts. If we follow this strictly, then this enemy is conquered. Otherwise, this enemy is insatiable, right? Cannot be controlled. Just by trying to artificially control, or the other side where you enjoy more and more so that eventually the lust will go down, that is a completely incorrect idea, that because it's like adding fuel to the fire. The more fuel is added, the fire is going to become stronger and stronger. So the lust cannot be satisfied by trying to enjoy unrestricted in unrestricted manner. Rather, we regulate our senses, then the lust has no avenues. Or even if there are avenues, because the intelligence is so strong that it can control the mind can control senses, and the senses are not going haywire, right? Going not, that verse 260 of Bhagavad Gita, that yatatopi kaunteya purushasya vipasita indriyani pramatini haranti prasabam mana. Haranti means it just conquers or captures the mind, and the mind is dragged, intelligence is dragged, soul is also dragged. So by spiritual intelligence or Krishna consciousness, we actually control the intelligence or purify intelligence, which can control the mind, and mind can direct the senses. And the senses are like the serpents, even though they are still externally engaged in external activities or material activities, but it's because regulated, it's like broken fangs of the snake. It cannot have any poisonous effect. Even if the senses bite us, no effect of that, because the senses have lost that poison tooth. So they don't have any effect or no impact. And that comes only through spiritual power or spiritual association. And more importantly, the last verse we saw that we have to constantly be in association of spiritual energy, because at any point of time we have the tendency to fall down, because we are very minute, we are very small, we are tiny compared to Krishna's energy. So always be dependent on Krishna, be fully surrendered to Krishna in that spirit, that ultimately everything is coming from Krishna. It's through Krishna's mercy only I'm able to do something. So whatever, whether it's material activities or spiritual services, always we must have this humility. That's how we develop humility, that everything is coming from Krishna. We are completely dependent on Krishna's mercy. Only by his mercy I'm able to carry out certain activities. It's not my own capacity, right? Ultimately, the capacity also comes from Krishna. So that's the conclusion of this chapter. So I think if devotees want to share just their realizations or any points that how you see this whole chapter from in your own way, your understanding, if you can summarize, maybe one or two devotees can summarize. Amit Prabhu, I'll start with you. Oh, Amit Prabhu is not there, is it, today? See him.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, can I just leave,
Yeah,
Prabhuji, because I
Madhu.
need
Yes,
to.
yes.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much, Prabhuji. So sorry, very sorry. Hare
No,
Krishna.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, Madhu. Are you saying something, Madhu? I can't hear you.
I think Prabhuji, she wanted to leave.
Oh, leave, is it? Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted to share something. Another Prabhu, anything to share?
Yeah, Prabhu, I can add some. Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu, can you hear me, Prabhu?
Yeah.
Yeah, Prabhu. Actually, what I learned from this Karma Yoga is how we need to understand ourselves. What is how we can conquer our different problems through a true understanding that whatever activity we do, we should do not for our selfishness or self gratification. We should do it as a yajna, so that we will not have first attachment, which is causing the fearfulness and anxiety. And we cannot be idle. We should do our activity thinking as it's a sacrifice for Krishna, and then do our activity, the karma yoga,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
considering the outcome
Yes.
of any expectations. That's what I understand. And it's
Yeah.
actually useful for me how I carry out my regular activities of doing office. What are the issues we face? How we can. We have always a lot of dilemmas.
Yeah,
How to
of course.
face this one, but actually this particular chapter and your great explanation given me a lot of clarity. That how I can take off, for me, like how I can be like, the lotus flower on the water.
In the water, yeah.
Just be there. Don't get affected by all
Yeah.
this
Correct.
disturbance.
Yeah, thank you,
And
Prabhu. Actually, it is Prabhupada's. The more we dive into Prabhupada's purports and his books, right? So we get a lot of understanding, and actually Prabhupada is speaking to us through his books. So even though personally he may not be there, the more we take shelter of Prabhupada's books, right, you will get so much encouragement and so much of understanding and very, very practical ideas. Even though what Prabhupada has written 50, 60 years back, even now, according to time, place, and circumstance, we can see that how it is still very much applicable to us. As you rightly mentioned, right, different situations we face in our day-to-day life. We can all see it through Prabhupada's purports.
Correct.
So that's
And one more thing I want to add, this understanding we might get it. For me, I have in my past I got this one, but later I forget it. But one thing is we need to keep always in touch with the books. Otherwise, even though we know, after sometimes we forget it, and then we are ultimately under the influence of the Maya's effect.
Yeah. So in fact, Prabhupada told his disciples that if you don't read my books at least for 1 hour a day, you will fall down. So that was a very categorical statement from Prabhupada. Yeah, because many times devotees complain that I'm not getting time for, for reading because I'm busy doing this, busy doing that. Even spiritual activities, the brahmacharis said, no, you will fall down if you don't read. Because that's what, otherwise it becomes, a mental level, a sentimental, then slowly it'll degrade into, a ritualistic activity. So in order for us to be, that's the spiritual practice that Prabhupada is talking about. Unless our spiritual practice is strong, which means the foundation has to be our reading and hearing of scriptures, Krishna Katha and the philosophy and everything. That's what keeps us strong and moving. Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's like we are in a battle.
Yeah.
Just relax. The Maya is so strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And take away.
Yeah.
Thanks, Prabhu.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Anyone else would like to share anything?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yes, Radha Prabhu.
Oh, thanks so much for elaborately discussing each and every verse, Prabhu. We learned how to scrutinizingly study every word of Prabhupada's purports. So thanks for all the guidance. And my take-home point is, Prabhu, from this. So it is better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. That's my take-home, Prabhu.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Very practical point, Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
So I really want to thank everyone for your patience. Sometimes you've gone over time, and very dedicatedly you have been attending all the sessions during the week and in the weekend, despite all your other, kept aside other things that I'm sure all of you are busy in your own ways with the work, whether at home or whatever, and services more importantly. Yet you have taken time. So Krishna, I'm sure Prabhupada and Krishna will be very pleased. And I just pray that you are encouraged to continue your studies of Srila Prabhupada's books and also your services. And by Krishna's blessing, you all remain very strong in your practice and in your Krishna consciousness. So with that, we'll close the session today. Krishna willing, I will continue some other chapter. It may not be the next chapter, but there are more chapters to come. So some other chapter will continue again, taking your association. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu.
for your
Thank you,
guidance.
Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Prabhuji,
Hare Krishna.
we look forward for you, Prabhu. Thank you
I'm
so
also
much.
looking forward to take your association, Mataji. Thank you.